It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Police say they've recovered a crossbow as footage appears to show a suspect in the killing of 3 women in Hertfordshire. He is tonight in a serious condition in hospital. NATO allies unite in support of Ukraine and Joe Biden, as Sir Keir Starmer tells Sky News that criticism of the embattled president is misguided.
We covered a lot of ground, strategic ground, stuff that I particularly wanted to raise. We did it at pace. He was on good form.
Police in Bristol released this image of a man they want to question after suitcases containing human remains were found on the Clifton Suspension Bridge. Anger from consumers and environmental campaigners after the regulator gives the green light for water companies to raise bills. Plus, we trace the origin story of England's new Euros hero as the Prime Minister is pressed on whether there'll be a bank holiday if England bring home the trophy. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. Police say that the man suspected of murdering 3 women in Hertfordshire is in a serious condition in hospital and is yet to be questioned. Carl Clifford was discovered by police in Lavender Hill Cemetery in Enfield, North London, yesterday, following an extensive manhunt. They have not revealed how the former security guard sustained his injuries, but he is continuing to receive treatment. Officers say a crossbow has been recovered as part of the investigation. Here's our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt.
As the hunt for clues continued, a police guard on the alley where the suspect escaped. A security camera appears to show the suspect walking unhurried towards his car. What could be a crossbow covered up, clamped under his arm, a bag swinging behind him. He's seconds from the house where the 3 women were found dying. He takes his time to load what police believe is the murder weapon. He doesn't look like a man in a rush. Then he's gone. Soon after, the victims were discovered, Carol Hunt and her daughters Hannah and Louise. Less than 48 hours later, mourners joined worshippers at a regular church service in the town. The community came together in its shock and horror. There was some comfort in their shared grief. Among the mourners was Carol Hunt's best friend.
Just a lovely girl. I just can't believe it's happened. It's, like I say, it's a thing nightmares are made of. She was the nicest, kindest, sweetest person that you could ever meet. Beautiful, beautiful person.
How on earth do you comfort people after something like this?
If necessary, say words. Most of the time is just being and allow people to be. And that old adage, a shoulder to cry on. And then it just naturally all unfolds.
Police had appealed for information about a former soldier, Kyle Clifford. He reportedly had been in a relationship with Louise Hunt, who ran a dog grooming business. A day after the murders, Kyle Clifford was detained by police and paramedics in a cemetery close to his North London home. He was taken to hospital, where police said he was being treated for injuries. Armed officers, they insisted, had not fired any shots. He was in a serious condition and detectives were still waiting to speak to him. They have, they said, recovered a crossbow. The victims were the wife and daughters of Sky horse racing commentator John Hunt. Police were still at the family's home and appealed for anyone with information to contact them. Martin Brunt, Sky News in Hertfordshire.
The NATO summit in Washington comes to a close this evening. Much of the rhetoric focused on staying the course in the alliance's support of Ukraine. But President Zelenskyy has tonight pushed for the United States to lift limits on using its weapons to strike military targets in Russia. if Ukraine is to win the war. Well, let's take a look at the commitments to Ukraine made by the different NATO countries. NATO allies have pledged at least £33.6 billion or €40 billion in military aid within the next year. The UK has promised £3 billion, with Sir Keir Starmer vowing to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Britain has also granted Ukraine permission to use its Storm Shadow missiles to hit targets inside Russia. It's been announced that long-range US cruise missiles, including the Tomahawk Cruise SM-6 and hypersonic missiles, will be deployed periodically in Germany from 2026 for the first time since the Cold War. Russia has said there will be a military response to the new threat. There's been a key focus on boosting Ukraine's air defences. The Netherlands, Norway and Denmark are transferring the first batch of US-made F-16 fighter jets. Denmark has committed 19 in total, while the Netherlands has promised 24. Another 5 new air defence systems are being sent. The US will give an additional Patriot air defence system, so too Germany and Romania, and the Netherlands is supplying a Patriot system made up of components donated by other countries. And Italy has said it will provide an SAMPT air defence system. Well, the Prime Minister is due to address the media this hour. Earlier, he spoke to our political editor, Beth Rigby. She spoke to him about whether he was practising what he was preaching on defence spending and whether he had any concerns about President Biden's fitness for office.
Day 2 on the world stage for Sir Keir Starmer, starting with a visit to Arlington Cemetery. And another reminder of the instability of the era he now presides over. Visiting this memorial to conflicts of the past, doing diplomacy with counterparts to shore up stability for the future. Hello, Prime Minister.
Hello.
Having been at the right-hand side of the US President just yesterday, I asked the Prime Minister to address the questions of Joe Biden's suitability to lead.
I spent time with him yesterday. We were billed for a 45-minute bilateral. It was best part of an hour by the time we'd finished. We covered a lot of ground, strategic ground, stuff that I particularly wanted to raise. We did it at pace. He was on good form. And I was very pleased that we were able to cover that amount of ground.
So you think that criticism is misguided?
Well, he was on good form with me and we were covering
it's misguided.
really important... Yes.
This summit's focus on Ukraine and questions for the PM on putting his money where his mouth is.
So what I want to do is make the commitment, be absolutely clear how we reach that commitment, and that it's within our fiscal rules. That actually is a more serious commitment than being arbitrary.
Let me put it another way
it.
then. I understand what you're saying. Is it your ambition as Prime Minister to achieve that target in your first term in office?
I'm not going to put a date on it because it's going to be within our fiscal rules.
So you're not putting the money where your mouth is?
Look, I'm being serious about how we meet that 2.5%.
In a week of political firsts, there was a personal reflection too, for a Prime Minister who often talked about his parents on the campaign trail. You said at the time of the Platinum Jubilee, it was the proudest day of your parents' lives to go to Buckingham Palace and to see you receive a knighthood. What do you think they would have made of seeing you, their son, walking through the door of Downing Street as Prime Minister?
Oh, they'd have loved that. And there's a real part of me that just wishes that they could have been there, because that would have been very special for them. Obviously, they're not with us anymore. They won't have that moment. But I can't pretend to you that I haven't thought about that.
Was it a bit bittersweet then?
Not bittersweet, but, you know, I would have loved them to have been there. And they weren't there. And Vic obviously lost her mum in the Labour leadership contest, so both of us had a thought and a discussion about that. We would have loved our parents to have been there. They weren't, but we smile because we know what they would have thought had they been there.
As Keir Starmer settles in and makes friends, this is perhaps the last foreign trip he'll make without political baggage. It will only get harder when he returns home.
And Beth joins me live now on the telephone from where the Prime Minister is going to be making his address in the next half hour or so. Beth, do you think he's achieved what he set out to on this his first big appearance on the global stage as Prime Minister?
Well, Gillian, I just think we should also stop to think it was but a week ago that Keir Starmer, that exit poll dropped and he realised he was going to become Prime Minister. And now he finds himself a week later here in a closing press conference. We're going to get him in about an hour at the 75th summit of NATO. That is quite a whirlwind week for anyone, isn't it? And in terms of the trip, I would say that there were two goals, really. One was around diplomacy, one was around policy. On diplomacy, this was all about showing momentum, getting Keir Starmer out here, bringing ministers with him. He brought his Minister for European Relations. He also brought his Defence Secretary and Foreign Secretary to have a kind of diplomacy blitz and get around lots and lots of leaders. And in terms of that, Number 10 think it went very well. This is one senior figure saying it was great to have so many leaders here in the first full week. It shortcut a process that could otherwise have taken months to get round everyone. It meant we could make the most of the momentum coming out of the election. And while there was maximum interest in Keir Starmer to raise all the issues he wanted and reset from our predecessors, and then that comes to policy. Because in terms of the reset, I think there's two things going on here. There is a reset here on Europe, a clear reset on Europe with a Prime Minister that did not want Brexit and is now using this as a lever in which to make overtures to European partners as he seeks to strengthen defence ties, security ties, and of course trade ties. Ask people in Number 10, they think that there has been a gear change on this, and there was a concrete example of this when Chancellor Scholz of Germany has signed a deal to try and deepen defence ties with the UK. It was something Rishi Sunak was looking to do, was in discussions to do, and it's nailed on by Sir Keir Starmer. But I think in terms of policy, there is also continuity. There is continuity, Sunak, here, and that comes to Ukraine, keeping up the funding, standing side by side, committing to the 2.5% of defence spending, although no time frame. So I think they're very happy here, but very aware that this is the honeymoon period and it will be over soon. He's got a very full in tray when he gets home.
OK, Beth, thank you. And that's her news conference coming up at around 10:45. Well, we did hear support from Keir Starmer for Joe Biden in Beth's report earlier. And tonight, the Danish Prime Minister has told Sky News that she too has confidence in the president's abilities.
I have a good cooperation with President Biden, and I have to say, I think the only one who is really happy about all these discussions about European and American leaders are probably Putin. I think we should focus much more on the war and all the challenges in front of our alliance. I look at as president who is in a good shape. I trust him. He's a good ally, and I think he's a good leader.
Well, let's speak now to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who's in Washington, D.C. for us. Mark, support for the president from two NATO allies, but in the next hour, all eyes on Joe Biden and how he'll perform in the public gaze.
Yes, let's be clear, the support for President Biden from all NATO allies on the face of it has been absolutely, has been as strong as you might expect it to be. The language there from the Danish Prime Minister, very diplomatic. But look, they all know that President Biden is fighting for his political life, frankly. Let me paint you a picture where we are now, because we're in a corner of the massive hall where this NATO conference, NATO summit has been ongoing. And frankly, the room looks pretty empty at the moment, much emptier than it did, because everyone is in the corner of the room queuing to get into the Biden news conference that is due to get underway in around about an hour and a quarter's time. Huge anticipation, honestly. It is exactly 2 weeks since that disastrous debate against Donald Trump. President Biden, by his own admission, had a bad night. I think that is an understatement. And ever since then, he has been fighting for his political life. The fact that he lasted the first week, I think, surprised people. But on the face of it, he is utterly defiant. He says he will stand against Donald Trump. He will be the candidate and he will win. But I can tell you, over the course of the past week, there have been growing calls. It feels tonight like that dam is beginning to break with a growing number number, still a small number publicly, but a growing number of his own side on Capitol Hill now saying he should step down, compounded yesterday by that bombshell by George Clooney, only an actor, you might say. Well, that would be wrong. A massive donor to the Democratic Party, a close friend of President Biden, a supporter of President Biden, and a close friend, too, of another man, of President Obama. The fact that George Clooney chose to come out and write that opinion piece in the New York Times, such a devastating assessment of why he thinks Joe Biden will lose the election, will lose the House and will lose the Senate and should stand down. That was devastating. All eyes in an hour and a quarter's time will be here in Washington at the news conference which President Biden will give. How will he perform? It is 2 years since President Biden gave a news conference of this type. He doesn't do news conferences precisely because his team believe it is not his strongest point. He is 2 years older than he was at his last news conference. These are high-stakes times, extraordinary times for American politics.
OK, Mark, for the moment, thank you. That news conference coming up at around 11:30 p.m. In Bristol, police have revealed details of a man they want to talk to after 2 suitcases containing suspected human remains were found at the Clifton Suspension Bridge. They were discovered late last night, and this afternoon, police released an image of a man they're looking for. Our West of England correspondent Dan Whitehead reports.
It is Bristol's iconic landmark, now at the centre of a disturbing police investigation. Officers are urgently searching for this man. Dressed in black, a gold earring and white-soled trainers, he's wanted in connection with the discovery of human remains. Avon and Somerset police responded to a call in Bristol just before midnight on Wednesday after reports of a man with a suitcase acting suspiciously on Clifton Suspension Bridge. They found a suitcase abandoned and shortly afterwards a second suitcase nearby. Inside both, human remains. A discovery that has sparked a major police response with helicopter and Coast Guard deployed.
What we do know is that the suspect arrived here at Clifton Suspension Bridge in a taxi. That vehicle has been seized by the police and the taxi driver in question is helping officers with their inquiries.
Tracing the suspect, now a top priority for police.
Officers are currently working to track his movements through CCTV, and I can confirm that we know he left in the direction of Lee Woods behind me. At this stage, we are not aware of any current risk he poses to the wider public. However, if anyone sees him, we advise them not to approach him, and please do call 999 immediately.
This is a wealthy part of Bristol, with its residents left worried.
I never thought... Oh, I'm in so shock, to be honest. I can't talk. Yeah. I'm sorry.
The world's going mad, isn't it, really? Some horrible thing happen every day, doesn't it?
It's horrible. It's really sad news to hear, especially so close and so local.
A post-mortem examination began on Thursday afternoon. It's not known whether the remains belong to one or more victims. For now, a manhunt for a suspect still on the run. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Bristol.
Rising bills and dirty rivers were 2 issues that helped contribute to the devastating defeat of the Conservatives in last week's election. Today, it passed to the new government to grasp the nettle as the water regulator recommended an average 21% rise in bills, smaller than water companies wanted, but an amount that Ofwat said was fair and necessary. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso sent this report from Henley-on-Thames, one of those areas lost by the Tories to the Liberal Democrats last week.
If you want to swim in the Thames, you need to be braced for more than the temperature. This stretch at Wallingford is newly classified as bathing water, but an industry that's proved better at removing money from the water system than keeping sewage out has few friends among the regulars.
I feel terribly angry. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find the right words about what Thames Water's doing in terms of putting sewage into the rivers on a day-to-day basis.
The government should never have allowed the private companies to siphon off profits and pay shareholders without investing in the infrastructure.
Consumers all over the country will soon be paying more for their water after regulator Ofwat released its verdict on company business plans for the next 5 years. Water bills will rise on average by 21% or £19 a year. That's less than the 32% increase companies asked for. Southern Water customers will see the biggest increase. It asks for a 73% hike worth £306, off what limits that to 44%. And troubled Thames Water wanted a 43% hike, but will have to make do with 21%. If a privatised system is to work, companies need to offer a return to investors. And the industry says the regulator's ruling means the money may dry up.
This decision by Ofwat puts our environment and our economy at risk. The recovery of our rivers will be slower, house building will be increasingly blocked, and our economy and the wider growth will not happen as much as we need it to.
The challenge is most acute for Thames Water, which said this week it will run out of money within a year if it can't find fresh investment. Thames Water is drowning in debt, but its customers are often swimming in sewage, and that is a toxic combination for a company that says it needs to hike customer bills to help not just clean up rivers and build new infrastructure, but plug a gaping hole in its finances. The new Environment Secretary, who summoned company bosses to Whitehall, wants Thames to bail itself out.
Nationalising any of the water companies would cost billions of pounds and take years, potentially. I want to get to work quickly to clean up the unacceptable levels of pollution that are so outraging the public when they see it in their rivers, in their lakes and in their seas.
Thames Water is not the only water company that's made money while failing consumers, but it is in the deepest trouble. Up the proverbial creek, and the regulator may just have removed the paddle. Paul Kelso, Sky News in the Thames Valley.
The government is expected tomorrow to announce plans to alleviate the intense pressure on prisons. The Prison Governors Association said that some inmates would be released early to create what they called essential space across the prison system. Our political correspondent Dan McCaffrey joins me now from Westminster. And Darren, this has long been spoken about, but this could still prove a very controversial move, couldn't it?
Yeah, controversial indeed. Releasing prisoners early is not something I think voters will be terribly happy with. It is something, though, the government argue is absolutely necessary. Why is that? Well, for the last 18 months, prisons in England and Wales have been operating at around 99% capacity, with 100 prisoners being added to that figure every single week. It is not sustainable. In fact, the expectation is that by the start of next month, prisons will reach 100% capacity, with the inability to take new prisoners. And that's why the new governments are saying they're going to have to make a tough decision on all of this by trying to reduce the prison population. How are they going to do that? Well, there are suggestions. What could happen is that prisoners, instead of being released halfway through their prison term, that 50% target will be lowered to 40%, that they only have to serve 40% of the sentence. The consequence of that, potentially up to 20,000 prisoners, Gillian, being released in the months to come. Quite an extraordinary figure when you think about it. But there will be a focus on who is being released. The government tonight suggesting that does not want to include violent criminals, doesn't want to include sex offenders or domestic abusers. But there will be that question and that scrutiny that if the government do go ahead with this, about which prisoners are released and when. And also, this is clearly not a long-term solution. So what is the government's long-term solution to this current prison problem?
Darren, thank you. The new Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, entered office declaring that the NHS was broken, and today he took the first steps to diagnose why, with an independent review into the performance of the health service. It comes as the latest performance statistics for the NHS showed a mixed picture, with waiting lists for routine hospital treatment in England rising for the second month in a row. Here's our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi.
Simon Surgeon.
Hayley Scrub Nurse. Sunita Anaesthetist.
Manuel Scrub Nurse.
Sonia ATP.
Simon Gonsalves is preparing his team for surgery.
We're going to use a flexible sigmoidoscope.
First on his list this morning is a 55-year-old male rectal cancer survivor.
We're looking to go on to improve his quality of life by reversing his stoma.
The NHS waiting list in England has grown again, and this is exactly the sort of life-changing procedure that patients are having to endure lengthy waits for.
It's very important to patients. What we're trying to do is to ensure that this gentleman can then go on to live a normal life after his rectal cancer treatment, after surviving his rectal cancer treatment.
Are you happy that you understand what we're doing today?
Everything, yeah.
Diane knows just how important early intervention is. Her breast cancer was found in June and removed just weeks later.
I've heard horror stories and listened to other people, but this is my first experience of an operation. It's literally been so quick. I haven't had time in between to even think or worry too much.
Calderdale and Huddersfield NHS Foundation Trust has turned one of the longest waiting lists in the country into one of the shortest. And one of the ways it's managed this is by incentivising theatre staff to work at weekends. The Health Secretary wants to repeat the success that this trust has had with reducing its waiting list across the NHS. But the challenge is huge. England has fewer hospital beds, lower numbers of key staff, and spent less on equipment and buildings than other comparable health systems. The new Health Secretary is aware of the challenges. He's ordered an official investigation into the state of the health service.
The NHS is broken. The issues that we've been talking about during the election campaign, the waiting lists, ambulances not arriving on time, people queuing around the block to see a GP, not being able to find a dentist, all of that is evident.
But much of his ambition relies on an exhausted workforce to step up again. Describing the NHS as broken might not help. When the Health Secretary says the NHS is broken or wrecked, is that useful language for you?
What I see on a day-to-day basis is that we provide some really excellent services for patients, and we get feedback that tells us as much. There is a challenge with morale, but I think it's about focusing on how we can create safe work environments.
Diane's cancer has spread to her lymph nodes, and this, her second operation inside a month, will remove it. A national health service that, when it works properly, is saving and changing lives. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Huddersfield.
Now, England fans in Germany and back at home might have been nursing sore heads this morning, but thoughts have now turned firmly to Sunday's final against Spain in Berlin, as fans frantically try to get tickets to witness what could be an historic victory for England's men. Focus too on the hero of last night's last gasp win against the Netherlands, Ollie Watkins. From Germany, here's our sports correspondent, Rob Harris.
Just seeing and hearing them tells you everything.
Southgate, you're the one. You should turn me on.
While they follow England on the emotional roller coaster. The last gasp goals and the hope. Now on Sunday, they'll finally have a trophy to celebrate. Fueled by the doubters at the Euros.
Judge us after the tournament, judge us when it's finished, and we'll see where we're at. And we've got to a final, we can be proud of that, but ultimately, that's not why we're here. We're here to win it, and we know Sunday will be tough against Spain. They're a great team. But yeah, we've got one more step to make history.
But the Three Lions have a day less than Spain to prepare to land their first silverware since 1966.
Just remember how England were at rock bottom when Gareth Southgate took charge 8 years ago. Now it's no longer about early eliminations, even without winning a match. This manager has taken the Three Lions to unprecedented highs across so many tournaments. Now he has another shot at finally landing a trophy.
Now fans chasing tickets for the final.
Come on, England, we're going to Berlin! Hey!
Still savouring knocking out the Dutch in Dortmund.
I want to say carnage. Honestly, the feeling, it was just absolutely beautiful.
Just like one of the best feelings of our lives, I think. We just feel so lucky to be here. Ollie Watkins' goal was right in front of us, and it was just, the atmosphere was absolutely insane. Absolutely one of the best nights ever.
And support far and wide is appreciated by England's new super sub hero.
Just obviously keep supporting us. One more game to go. So their support don't go unnoticed. All the boys see all the videos of them celebrating in the beer gardens and stuff like that. So, yeah, just keep showing us support.
At his old school in Devon, they always felt the striker was destined for greatness.
He was a bit of a cheeky chappy, but what was clear, he was just a really gifted sportsman. The football shone. He was just head and shoulders above everyone. He was like a Rolls-Royce player. So he just had a bit more time than everyone else, and he could do those few extra little bits of skill that other students just, it was a bit beyond them.
Now decisions for Southgate, whether to start Watkins against Spain. And for the Prime Minister, whether to grant a bank holiday to celebrate England's footballers.
It's never in doubt.
Well, we should certainly mark the occasion. I don't want to jinx it. I went to the last Euros finals. I don't want to go through that again. So don't want to jinx anything. We must mark it in some way, but the most important thing is getting it over the line on Sunday.
It's going on! It's going on! It's going
3 years after coming within penalties of glory, now to Berlin to banish those memories, hoping for triumph after all the years of torment. Rob Harris, Sky News, Dortmund.
Come on. That was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the economist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Now, amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Eye, its headline: Starmer faces mutiny on child benefit from Labour backbenchers. We'll be right back with that story and others. Do stay with us. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Police say they've recovered a crossbow but are yet to speak to Carl Clifford as new footage appears to show the triple murder suspect. He's in a serious condition in hospital. Sir Keir Starmer has told Sky News that US President Joe Biden was on good form when they met in Washington and that criticism of his cognitive ability is misguided. Detectives are hunting for a man who left 2 suitcases containing human remains near the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages of the newspapers as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the economist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Telegraph claimed that violent prisoners will be released early as the government take action to address the prison's overcrowding crisis. That also takes the lead in the Daily Mail, who carry the headline, Labour accused of scare tactics over full jails, and a warning 20,000 inmates could be released. And in the Times, there's the claim that prisoners are to be freed after serving 40% of their sentence, and the changes could be implemented within weeks. There's more trouble for the new government in the eye as they say that Sir Keir Starmer faces mutiny on child benefit from Labour backbenchers. In The Guardian, there's more on that rise in water bills as politicians and campaigners claim there is contempt for customers. The Bristol Post leads with the discovery of 2 suitcases containing human remains on the Clifton Suspension Bridge. Meanwhile, the Express carries a call for a ban on crossbows following the shocking events in Bushey, with a claim the deadly weapon can be bought in just 2 minutes. According to the Financial Times, the UK economy grew by 0.4% in May, twice the expected figure, as the pound hit its highest level against the dollar for a year. The Metro carries the King's good wishes for the England team ahead of the Euros final on Sunday. The headline, May you reign over Spain. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Steve Richards and Salma Shah. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the prisons story on many of the front pages, but the Times first of all. And I guess the headline that prisoners are to be freed after serving only 40% of their sentence is the one that's going to perhaps worry people and is perhaps the shocking element of this.
Yeah, unavoidable, inevitable. The prisons are packed. And you can't build a prison overnight. So what do you do? And the government, this new government, is doing 2 things. One is a framing that they're basically, with justification, blaming it on the previous government, leaving them with this dilemma. But the other is potentially, and it'd be fascinating to hear Salma, who's worked in the Home Office, whether this is a moment when you can reframe the debate about how you deal with prisoners, because our prisons have been packed for years. And then the reoffending rate is very high when they come out. Now, we've got a new prisons minister interested in arguments and themes around rehabilitation. Whether this is a moment when you have to cut through the hysteria of these front pages, that there is a new way of dealing with offenders rather than cramming them in these unsustainably overcrowded prisons.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point, because it is about how Sir Keir Starmer is going to frame this. I am slightly disappointed. I can understand the logic of why he's saying, well, you know, the Conservatives left me with this mess, and indeed they did. But I would have liked to see him lean into a little bit more around that appointment that he made of Timpson, and the fact that actually he's looking at a new system and he's asking himself the wider question, which is, does the prison system still work? Are we getting the right thing out of it?
But isn't that implicit in his appointment of Timpson, because that's his major
but I think
cause,
if you have this against that, these headlines against that, saying that you're going to have a huge proportion of the prison population that were serving custodial sentences of 4 years, only serving 40% of that. I think you have to be much more active in pushing it. Because a lot of people, they won't even know who the prisons minister is. Not everybody's watching the news in as much detail as we are. So I think he needs to really take this opportunity to talk about what his vision is for the future. Because Steve's right, this has been really, really difficult. And one of the hard things that Labour's going to have to do now is think about what is this going to cost if they really want to transform the state. And they're still, in a precarious position on the finances. I don't think the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is going to want to spend any money, but unfortunately that is what it may take. And perhaps they're not ready to say that yet, but signalling a little bit more that reform agenda, I think, would be good.
I mean, possibly that's what we will hear some more of from Sabanush Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, tomorrow.
We'll have to. I mean, I think there's a sequencing. First, you establish culpability, that they are facing something that was not of their making. They've only been in power for a few days. So you establish that this is what they are facing, with no easy route ahead. They knew, by the way, in advance that they would be facing this nightmare within a week or two. And then I hope, as Salma hopes as well, which is interesting, they do reframe the argument. I think they will have to. They can't just say, look, this is a complete nightmare. We'd prefer to lock them all up, but we're letting them all out. I mean, that argument's not going to work. But they knew it would be tough with the newspapers, as it is tonight. So they have to establish culpability with the previous lot. And then, I hope, make the arguments that this is the beginning of a whole new approach.
Yeah, and then when we look at the Daily Telegraph, the sort of headlines that are really going to scare people. Violent prisoners will be freed early. The Telegraph reporting that the Justice Secretary will be announcing this, that measures would free criminals, some convicted of violent offences.
Yeah, I mean, the government has said that they are not going to do that. They've said that there's a specific carve-out for violent offenders, sexual offenders, and those accused of terrorism, and in some instances, domestic abusers as well.
So misinformation by the Telegraph?
Well, perhaps because... but they've obviously gone big on this headline, so maybe the catch-all doesn't remove all violent prisoners, and levels of violence as well, I think, would have to be considered. But I think what's interesting about this is actually the sub underneath the headline, which is police are warning of a breakdown of law and order. So if you are taking people and bringing them out of prison, and a custodial sentence of 4 years is still quite a significant sentence, and they're only serving 40%, and all of a sudden this huge number of people back in the community, I think the police are right to raise that worry. I hope it doesn't materialise, but I hope as well that the government has some kind of mitigation plan, because certainly people are going to be worried. It's on the front page of the Times, the Telegraph, and possibly the Mail as well.
I bet they announced some kind of mitigation plan to accompany this. It is quite sudden, although, as I say, they knew they were going to have to deal with this before they got into power. This is a moment where you then have to put a case. But clearly, when you have headlines like that, it's going to frighten a lot of people, because I think there will be a lot of people coming up. But there is no alternative route. These prisons are just insanely crammed. And in fairness to a whole load of prison inspectors, you'd have probably dealt with them. They've been saying this for a long, long time, but it's now reached a point of unsustainability. So there really is no choice.
But the Conservatives saying that Labour are scaremongering, saying that there will be a collapse of law and order within weeks, and, the prisons are set to overflow and that there'll be chaos within weeks. They're suggesting that is scaremongering, Salma.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because I think that, the scare tactics around full jails, that's a decision that the government has to take, because if you've got only a couple of hundred places left all around the UK, and you've got a justice system that is still convicting people and requiring custodial sentences, you do need that to work. I think this is the moment, as Steve says, that it's been brought to the public's attention in a much more stark way than has been previously, even though we know that this problem has been happening underneath the surface. And it might allow for that conversation to say, let's think about how we do this differently. And actually, the next time there's a spending review, the Chancellor is going to prioritise prisons. I think the political question is going to be how much do you sell on prioritising prisons versus, say, the NHS? And that's the kind of deft handling that's going to be required.
OK, let's move on to the eye and possibly the first rumblings from the backbenchers for Sir Keir Starmer to be vetoed, and this is on their child benefit. Steve?
Yeah, this is very interesting because only just, of course, but I'm old enough to remember the last Labour government, which won a landslide in 1997. And the first significant revolt was over benefits. And, yeah, it was a big revolt. But, of course, they had a landslide, so it didn't change the policy. But it put pressure on then Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. And Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves and others are hugely aware of the pressure. I mean, they're getting it from Gordon Brown, who is, you know, one of the figures they revere. So they're aware of it. But I can understand from their point of view. We've been talking about all the demands. You know, someone was saying NHS or prisons. Well, this is an expensive measure, and I can understand why they're not able to rush into it at the beginning of the term. I'm sure they're going to do it at some point, but not at this point. There will be, if there is a contrived vote, there will be a rebellion, as there was in 1997, but not enough to change the policy, unless Rachel Reeves announces it in her budget, which is not impossible, but I think unlikely, given how tough she's going to be on public spending at first.
Sam, do you think that's unlikely that we'll see that as soon as the...
We're talking about a minimum of £2.5 billion to reverse this policy. I do not know where she will find that money, given all the other pressures she's got. I understand, you know, that because of this large majority, also people feel there's a thing in Parliament where actually MPs feel more able to rebel or, you know, try and bounce prime ministers into things because they don't think they're going to wreck the government in any way by doing it. So I understand that people want to make that point, and they have every right to. But this is too significant a cost.
Quickly, just we've got time to have a look at the FT front page. Steve, you've got about 40 seconds. The economy is looking good for Labour.
Rishi Sunak will wake up and read that front page and think, why didn't I wait a bit longer with these kind of economic good news coming through? This is if it's sustained for longer, this is really good news for the government, substantial good news, because, of course, growth is its #1 mission, and that raises tax revenues, and you're into a virtuous cycle. Some think it's going to get worse again by the autumn, but this is, you know, quite upbeat and unexpectedly so, I think the FT is saying.
And the Conservatives would say not of Labour's making, but that's another discussion.
They can say that, it's fair enough, but they've been in for 5 days.
And they will.
Yes, Steve and Salma, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, is it fair to ask people to pay nearly £20 a year more for their water supply? We'll discuss that next. Do stay with us.
Samantha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling? I am angry. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that.
We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world.
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Steve Richards and Salma Shah. We just want to bring you an update on President Biden, who will be speaking later this evening. But he's just given a short address at the NATO summit, announcing support for President Zelenskyy. But he did commit a new gaffe, which fueled concerns about his capacity. Let's take a listen.
That's what the compact says, loudly and clearly. And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelenskyy. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President.
I'm better.
You are a hell of a lot better.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
OK, well, let's get the thoughts of Salma and Steve. I mean, he realised his mistake almost instantaneously and tried to row back from it, but...
Look, in any instance that you can allow people to make errors, I think in this particular context where he is being judged, his nomination is being judged as a Democrat who's going to be put forward for president again, I think this is cataclysmic for him, because this is not just something that he's gotten wrong for the first time. This is a series of errors, and I think it's going to be another thing for his detractors and people who are asking him to stand down to say, we just can't have this anymore.
Steve, what did you think watching that?
I'm kind of almost laughing to introduce Zelenskyy as Putin. I know, of course, he did correct it, but I mean, it's almost a sort of comical error. And of course, if it was the first time, it would be nothing. It would be funny, but nothing more than that. But in the context where he is fighting to hold on to this, in effect, candidacy for the second term, it's really damaging for him.
Do you think this is it now, Salma? That the Democrats will speak their mind and just see this as one gaffe too many?
The thing is, they have already started speaking their mind. I mean, we've seen in the last few days previous supporters, you know, famous celebrities in the form of George Clooney, Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker. They've all sort of come out and intimated that, you know, this is not safe anymore as a candidacy. But their system is so different to ours that only the president can basically, and the nominee, can decide that he's not going to run. There aren't the men in grey suits like we have in our system. You know, when Liz Truss had her mini budget, somebody went to go and see her and said, it's time to go because we have a parliamentary constitution, a parliamentary system. It's not the same there. So he has to decide, and this has to feature in that decision.
OK. Steve, let's just finish off on The Guardian and take a look at this story regarding the water companies' bills to rise, average of, I think, £19. The water companies saying it should have been more.
Yeah, well, two things will be true at the same time. Water companies are showing contempt. And have done, frankly, since this privatisation happened. It was a disastrous privatisation in the late 1980s, followed it closely, where poorly run state monopolies were replaced by these even worse run private monopolies. However, we need to raise the money to modernise these systems, to clean our rivers and seas. And so I'm afraid one route to raising the money is going to have to be price rises.
OK. Steve and Salma, thank you very much for taking us through the papers. We'll see you again in the 11 o'clock hour.